Hi there. Since I have started doing abortion related videos anyway, I think I'm going to kind of go to a more video blog, posting about abortion deaths that took place on anniversary dates and some of the lessons that we can learn from them. And I have my notes over here on another part of my screen. I'm going to be referring to them. I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about what I think we can learn from these and the things we need to keep in mind. So today is February 11th, and I want to talk about abortion death anniversaries that happened on February 11th. And I'm going to start with the most recent and work back. And the most recent was in 1992. And that was a young woman, 19 years old, named Danette, who went to Dr. Robert Tamas in Phoenix, Arizona for a nice, safe, legal abortion. Now, Danette had a rare condition that I cannot pronounce, but it's abbreviated PKD. And this is a hereditary blood disorder that made her a very high risk patient for an abortion. A high risk OBGYN named Dr. Thomas Murphy Goodwin testified in a court case later that really her abortion should have been done in a hospital and they should have had material on hand to deal with possible fatal blood clots that might form in her bloodstream during the abortion. And as you can expect, that's exactly what happened. She developed a blood clot and it traveled into her lungs. She stopped breathing. They called the ambulance, took her to the hospital, but she died that same day. And I want people to think about when they say a woman and her doctor informed consent. You know, was Danette told that she was really risking her life, high risk, doing this abortion in an outpatient setting? I can't say. I don't know offhand whether Dr. Tamas did that with her or not. But it certainly should give people pause when they're thinking about, a woman's having an abortion. It's a woman and her doctor, and trusting that that doctor is looking out for the woman. I think Danette's case kind of shows us that that can't be taken for granted. Now we have another case that just really sticks with you. Um, there's a minister, actually, it was a husband and wife minister couple. The wife's name was Ruth, and in 1985, she got a phone call from the hospital saying that you need to get here right away. Dawn, your daughter Dawn, is in the hospital fighting for her life. And Dawn was 13 years old, and Dawn had gotten pregnant and had kept this a secret from her parents. Her boyfriend knew, and a school counselor knew. So the boyfriend borrowed a credit card from a relative, and the counselor arranged to take Dawn to Eastern Women's Center to have an abortion without her family knowing about it. And a counselor there, and keep in mind, Eastern Women's Center was a member of the National Abortion Federation. That is supposedly cream of the crop. You can't get better than that. And a counselor at Eastern Women's Center saw that Dawn was very frightened and marked on her chart that she should be treated with tender, loving care. The doctor was named Alan Klein, and apparently his idea of tender, loving care was a little bit different from what that counselor thought. Um, the anesthesiologist, Robert Agente, didn't administer enough anesthesia to get Dawn the whole way through the abortion, and she started to come to. She started to cough, choke, and vomit. So instead of dealing with that adequately, Klein just put a breathing tube in her throat, set her aside, and went to take care of other things. And while Dawn was unattended, she lapsed into a coma. So only after this 13-year-old girl got to the hospital did somebody think to call her mother. And as Ruth said, I'm going to quote her, I was going, how can she be fighting for her life? She left for school this morning looking healthy, never been sick. While I was there at the hospital, they were doing tests. I had to keep my hand pressed over my mouth to keep from screaming in horror. I kept going, this is all a bad dream. I'm going to wake up and this will not have happened. And the family was at Dawn's bedside day after day, playing tapes of the family singing together, trying to wake her up. But 3 weeks later, 3 weeks after the abortion, on February 11th, 1985, Dawn died without ever having regained consciousness. And again, this kind of brings us to the woman and her doctor and how much these doctors can be trusted, that this guy stuck a breathing tube in and put the 13-year-old girl aside and she was not properly attended, and she just went into a coma there with lack of proper attention. And that this was a National Abortion Federation clinic. This was cream of the crop. This was not some fly by night. And that's something we really need to keep in mind. And there were two other women who died after abortions that I can think of off the top of my head at Eastern Women's Center. Dawn Mendoza, so they seem to have a thing against women named Dawn, and Venus Ortiz, who, like Dawn Ravenel, she went into a coma, but it took her years to die. So that's something else to kind of keep in mind there. And our next death goes back to 1916. And I really don't have a lot of information about this. I just got this off the Homicide in Chicago Interactive Database. A 42-year-old woman named Eva died in her Chicago home on February 11th, 1916. And the coroner's inquest concluded that an abortion had been performed by a midwife named Agnes Dzugas, D-Z-U-G-A-S, Dzugas. She was held by the coroner and indicted by a grand jury, but I never found a record that the case went to trial. But Chicago at that time was kind of a friendly place for abortionists. And then we have in 1905 a case where there was an abortion and a suicide. And a 17-year-old girl named Leona had been living in upstate New York in the home of a fellow named Dayton Hibner. And she'd been working there as domestic servant for 2 years. And she was in good health until about 5:15 p.m. that day when she was found in her room in a lot of pain, and she died 15 minutes later. And the coroner was notified. They conducted an autopsy, and when they're getting ready for this autopsy, Hibner said to the coroner that he was going to blow his brains out and end the matter. And I guess the coroner was a little taken aback by this, a little suspicious. So law enforcement sent a guard to Hibner's home with him to stay until the inquest was over. And he said he was going out to feed his horses, left the guard at the house, went to the barn, got out a double-barreled shotgun, and blew his head off. And so from a newspaper report, the coroner made discoveries after the girl's death, which, if proved, would have made the lynch of the suicide among the possibilities had he not taken his own life. So that kind of indicates that he had gotten this young girl pregnant. So we don't know who arranged that abortion. I was not able to find out who perpetrated it, but really that young woman needed to be taken out of that home where that guy was taking advantage of her like that. That's really very sad. And then we go back clear to 1897, where on February 11th, 65-year-old Henry, a man named Henry in Northport, Long Island, got a dispatch from Inspector Murray of the Brooklyn Police saying to go to Brooklyn right away, that his 21-year-old daughter, Cora, was deathly ill. And so Mr. Sammis and his wife got on the train, and about halfway to New York, Mr. Sammis got a copy of the morning paper and read that his daughter had died from a botched abortion. And he said, I was almost paralyzed with horror and could not believe the story to be true. And he was afraid of upsetting his wife, so he kept quiet about it and pretended he was adjusting the window in the railroad car and let the newspaper fly out the window so she wouldn't find out. And they went to the home of Mrs. Sammis's sister, and that's where they broke the news to Mrs. Sammis that what had happened. And Mr. Sammis went to the police station to learn more about this, and got a quote from a newspaper. The old man's eyes were red with weeping as he left the police station, and he was taken to the house, to an upstairs front room where Cora lay on the bed where she had died. And her father said her features had become so shrunken and emaciated that he hardly knew her. So they asked Cora's father about a fellow named Frank Cosgrove, and Mr. Sammis said that the family knew this fellow. He'd been courting Cora for about 2 years, and they had become engaged and were planning to get married soon. And In November of 1878, Cora went to Brooklyn to visit her aunt, and Cosgrove spent some time in her company. And the parents believe that it was during this time that Cora got pregnant. And as the newspaper said, an autopsy was performed at the coroner's office, which showed conclusively that death had resulted from malpractice, which at the time was a euphemism for an illegal abortion. And apparently, Frank had taken Cora to the home of 35-year-old Bertha Berger. And I have not been able to find out what her profession was, other than obviously that she did abortions. She performed the abortion, and Cora was kept there to convalesce. And at that time, that was normal. When women had abortions, they stayed wherever it is they had the abortion for several days to convalesce afterwards. So that was to be expected, but instead of getting better, she got ill. And Cosgrove sat up with her every night, kept getting concerned. So he found a doctor who advertised that he did midwifery, which was what obstetrics was called at the time. And um, Cosgrove gave Dr. Whitehead $100, which was a lot of money, to take over Cora's care. And Dr. Whitehead found that Cora had a raging fever from a uterine infection. And he said that the case was hopeless. So Ms. Berger, Bertha Berger, who had done the abortion, offered a bribe of $50 to have him provide the death certificate, because the public health office, the county office that accepted death certificates, would be very suspicious depending on who turned it in, and you could bring an investigation on yourself. But Whitehead consulted with his lawyer, who told him, don't do that. Instead, he went to the police and told them what was going on. So the police went to Berger's house and questioned Cora, and she knew that she was dying, and she gave a deathbed statement. And her last concern was for her fiance. Please don't let anything bad happen to Frank. And she admitted that she knew that this was an abortion house, so she went into this willingly. I wasn't able to find anything else on Bertha Berger that she'd been associated with any other abortion deaths. And the last one goes clear back to 1861, where a German physician named John Jochen was caring for a Mr. Malinkin, who was ailing in his Brooklyn house. And during one of the visits that Dr. Jochen made, Malinkin's 35-year-old wife, Caroline, said she didn't want to have so many children, wanted to know if she could get rid of the one she was pregnant with right now. Quote, the doctor replied that it was the easiest thing imaginable and that in 8 days it would be all over. So he set to work on her. He used drugs and instruments, but the only thing that happened was she got very sick. Her condition deteriorated, and she died late on the evening of February 11th. And Jochen was arrested, and I have not been able to follow the case any further. So there we got a case of a doctor performing the abortion, although in 1861, I'm not sure how much better off you are with a doctor than with somebody else doing your abortion. So, but still, in 1861, it was a doctor. I don't know what Bertha Berger's job was other than abortionist. And we don't know who did Leona's abortion. And we know it was a midwife for Eva. So those are the illegal and legal abortion deaths that I've learned about, where the anniversary is February 11th.